Welcome, everyone, to the Chained Opinion Podcast. We often hear these phrases like historical turning point. And today I think we're going to take a journey, an informational journey into one that I think still sparks a lot of questions even now.
Yeah, absolutely. We're jumping into the release just this week on March 18th, 2025, of previously classified documents connected to the 1963 assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, and this isn't a small number of documents. This is a pretty substantial unveiling. I mean, President Trump directed the release of over 1,100 documents that hadn't been seen before. That totals roughly 80,000 pages, all available now on the National Archives website.
Wow, yeah. A moment many have anticipated for so long. And Trump himself even acknowledged this by mentioning that people have been waiting, quote, for decades for these files. And initially, the word was that everything would be released with no redactions.
Yeah, that's a pretty big statement. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard even called it, quote, a new era of maximum transparency, specifically pointing out that these files were published with no redactions. So it really creates a sense of really open access.
It does. And to put this into context, President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas.
Right.
Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested and charged. And then, incredibly, was fatally shot 2 days later by Jack Ruby.
All right. Yeah. An incredible series of events.
A shocking sequence of events.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then in the aftermath, to try and understand what happened, the Warren Commission was formed.
Right.
And they concluded in 1964 that Oswald had acted alone.
Yeah.
But as you know, that finding hasn't stopped, decades of speculation and a number of alternative theories about the assassination.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's worth noting that the National Archives already holds a massive amount of material related to this. Over 6 million pages, in fact. And the vast majority of that had already been made public. So this recent action is about making more of those previously withheld records available to the public.
Right. And this push for transparency seems to be part of a broader effort. President Trump's January 2025 executive order pertained to the assassinations of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr.,
Oh, wow. Okay.
suggesting a real commitment to declassifying sensitive historical information. And adding another layer to this story, the FBI recently announced that they discovered roughly 2,400 previously unrecognized records connected to the JFK case. So these could potentially offer some new angles for researchers.
Yeah, potentially. Now, while the initial announcement suggested a complete unredacted release, we heard from a source later on that some future redactions might occur.
Okay.
Apparently limited to things like personal information, social security numbers, that sort of thing, as well as details about, quote, live assets in Cuba. So it seems that there's still some sensitivities at play.
Yeah. Given the sheer volume, those 80,000 pages, it's been indicated that it might take several days for all of them to actually appear on the National Archives website.
Oh, wow.
So a process that will unfold over time.
And already, some interesting details are emerging from what has been released. For example, there's a CIA memo from 1991 that recounts an interaction with a KGB official.
Okay.
This official apparently reviewed their own files on Lee Harvey Oswald.
Interesting.
And according to this memo, the KGB official believed that Oswald was not an agent controlled by them.
Okay.
However, the memo also states that Oswald was under pretty close surveillance by the KGB during his time in the USSR.
So they were watching him, but they didn't consider him like one of their own.
Yeah, interesting distinction. It's almost like keeping an eye on a potentially volatile individual.
Right.
And there's another detail in that same memo that the KGB officials' review of their files suggested that Oswald was considered a poor shot during his attempts at target practice in the Soviet Union.
A poor shot. Wow. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of a strange detail to come across, especially, when you consider what happened in Dallas. It makes you wonder about his marksmanship at that time.
And I bet researchers who have been studying this for years, they're very eager about this document release.
Yeah, I bet.
They have what's been described as a, quote, long list of previously released documents that were, heavily redacted, blacked out.
Okay, so what are they hoping to find in these now less restricted files? What are the big questions they're trying to answer?
Well, the focus is particularly on Cuba and any activities the CIA might have been involved in that relate to Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right.
Any new details that could shed light on those areas would be, incredibly valuable to them.
Yeah, it makes sense. We also know that even from previously released documents, we've gotten glimpses into the intelligence operations of that era.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the CIA cables and memos that detailed Oswald's visits to the Soviet and Cuban embassies in Mexico City just weeks before President Kennedy was killed, you know? Those have been under intense scrutiny for years.
Right. And those previously released documents,
Mm.
they gave us these crucial, though sometimes frustratingly incomplete pieces of the puzzle,
Right.
you know. And this new wave of information has the potential to either confirm, challenge, or even further complicate our understanding of what happened in Mexico City.
Right, and how it might connect to the assassination itself.
Yeah.
It's kind of remarkable how after all this time and the vast amount of information that has already come out, these newly available files can still, generate so much interest and potentially offer new avenues for investigation.
What's particularly compelling is the possibility of getting a more granular view, seeing details that were previously deemed too sensitive. And you can bet that researchers will be meticulously going through these 80,000 pages, looking for connections, inconsistencies, and those subtle clues that might have been hidden by those redactions.
Okay, so with this huge amount of information now out in the open, what do you think are some of the key areas that researchers and really anybody who's, interested in this will be focusing on most intently as they sort of dig through these documents?
Given the historical context and the enduring questions, I think there'll be a significant emphasis on anything that can tell us more about Lee Harvey Oswald himself.
Okay.
His connections, his activities, his motivations in the period leading up to November 22, 1963.
Right.
That includes a closer look at his interactions with those Soviet and Cuban embassies in Mexico City, as well as any previously obscured information about potential contacts or affiliations he might have had.
That makes sense. The question of whether Oswald acted alone has fueled so many of the alternative theories, so any fresh details about his relationships or movements could be absolutely critical.
Precisely. Beyond Oswald himself, there'll undoubtedly be intense scrutiny of any documents that could illuminate the actions and knowledge of U.S. intelligence agencies, especially the CIA concerning Oswald. Researchers will be trying to piece together what these agencies knew about him when they knew it, and whether there were any intelligence failures or missed opportunities.
And the mention of Cuba just keeps coming up. Could these new files potentially provide more clarity on any involvement, direct or indirect, of the Cuban government in the events surrounding the assassination? I mean, that's been a long debated aspect of this, hasn't it?
It has. The Cold War tensions of that era and the very complex relationship between the United States and Cuba have always been a significant part of the broader narrative.
Right.
Any new information that clarifies the nature of Oswald's contacts with the Cuban embassy or reveals previously unknown intelligence regarding Cuban activities related to Oswald would be incredibly significant for understanding that aspect of the story.
Yeah, it really is like peeling back layer after layer of a very intricate puzzle. With each document release, we get a slightly clearer, though, perhaps still incomplete picture of what happened.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. And it's important to keep in mind that even if these newly released documents don't contain a definitive smoking gun, that resolves all the mysteries.
Right.
That doesn't necessarily mean that conspiracies didn't exist.
Right.
It might simply mean that the crucial evidence remains elusive or wasn't documented in a way that would surface in these particular files.
Okay. So what do you think all this means for the long-standing debates and the many conspiracy theories that have swirled around President Kennedy's assassination, for decades? Do you see this release as having the potential to significantly alter the prevailing narratives?
Well, it's hard to say definitively, but it's probably more likely that this release will add further nuance and detail to our existing understanding rather than completely overturning established conclusions.
Right.
For those who believe in the lone gunman theory, these documents might offer more corroborating evidence or fill in some of the remaining gaps. On the other hand, those who subscribe to conspiracy theories will likely be scrutinizing the files for any inconsistencies, omissions, or suggestive details that could support their alternative explanations.
It sounds like the work of historians and researchers is far from over. In fact, it might just be entering a new, more detailed and intensive phase of analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. The sheer volume of information requires very careful and methodical analysis. It'll take time for researchers to sift through these 80,000 pages, cross-reference them with what's already known, and really assess the significance of any new revelations.
And it's worth noting what Jefferson Morley of the Mary Ferrell Foundation had to say. He called this release, quote, an encouraging start, and pointed out the positive step of eliminating what he described as rampant overclassification of trivial information. He estimates that about a third of previously redacted documents are now fully public, which is, a significant increase in transparency.
Yeah, Morley's perspective is valuable. It suggests that this release, while perhaps not the complete unveiling that some had hoped for, does represent a meaningful step forward in making more information available.
Right.
The fact that previously redacted material is now fully accessible will undoubtedly be a significant benefit for those studying this event.
However, he also made the point that this current release might not include all the files that were initially promised or those recently discovered FBI records that we talked about earlier.
Right.
So this suggests that there could be more information coming down the line.
Yeah, that's a crucial point to keep in mind. The process of declassification and public release can be complex and often unfolds in stages.
Right.
Just because certain files aren't in this initial batch doesn't necessarily mean that they won't become available at some point in the future.
So it seems like the intense public and historical interest in the details surrounding President Kennedy's assassination and the many theories that have arisen over the years will continue as people delve into these newly accessible records.
Yeah, without a doubt. This event remains a pivotal moment in American history.
Right.
And the release of these documents provides a fresh opportunity for researchers to revisit the evidence and perhaps gain a deeper, even if not entirely conclusive understanding of what transpired.
This has been a truly fascinating informational exploration into this significant document release. Thank you so much for shedding light on all of this for us.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It's an ongoing story. And these documents offer, valuable new perspectives for everyone to consider.
And for you, our listener, as you absorb the news of this substantial release, what new questions might arise for you about this pivotal moment in our history? What assumptions that you might have held could be challenged or perhaps reinforced as you and others explore these 80,000 pages? It certainly gives us all a lot to think about.
Indeed. It encourages us to remain curious, to engage critically with the information that becomes available, and to continue the pursuit of a more complete understanding of the past.
Absolutely. If you found this informational journey interesting, please do share it with others. Make sure to subscribe to the Chained Opinion podcast for more in-depth discussions like this. And we always appreciate your comments and thoughts. You can find the Chained Opinion podcast as an audio podcast on both YouTube Music and Spotify.
Yes, please do. And thank you for joining us today as we explore this significant historical disclosure.
Until our next informational journey, thank you for being with us.
Goodbye for now.